Emily Carter had always believed she could handle loneliness. As a travel photographer who jumped from one forgotten American town to another, silence was something she'd grown used to. But Willow Ridge felt different the moment she crossed the rusted metal sign that leaned half-broken at the side of the cracked road. The letters were faded, peeling like dead skin, barely readable beneath layers of grime and moss. "Welcome to Willow Ridge," it said, but the words felt more like a warning than a greeting. The town sat deep in the Appalachian woods, swallowed by a forest so dense that the sky itself appeared muted. It wasn't cloudy. Exactly, it was just darker, as if sunlight had learned to avoid this place on purpose. The air carried a smell of damp soil and rotting leaves, and the trees bent inward, their thick branches almost forming a cage around the town. Emily rolled down her car window just enough to breathe, but the cold that crept inside wasn't natural. It slipped along her skin like fingers, exploring, testing. She shook it off, telling herself she was overthinking the gloomy atmosphere. She'd visited hundreds of towns like this, rural, forgotten, aging, but none had ever unnerved her this quickly. The Marrow Inn stood at the end of the main road, a long, wooden building with a sagging porch and windows so dusty they reflected nothing. Emily parked her car, grabbed her duffel bag and camera case, and walked toward the entrance. Every step on the porch made the floorboards groan, the sound echoing too loudly in the stillness of the town. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The lobby was dim, lit only by a single wall lamp that flickered occasionally, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. A woman stood behind the counter, her pale hands folded neatly, her eyes hollow and ringed with deep circles. She watched Emily with the stiff posture of someone who had forgotten how to relax. "You're the one who called earlier," the receptionist said in a flat voice. "The photographer." "Yeah," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "I'm documenting forgotten towns across the states." Willow Ridge seemed interesting. The woman's jaw tightened. Interesting isn't the word most people would use. Emily laughed awkwardly. But the woman didn't join her. Instead, she slid a brass room key across the counter. "You're in room 5, end of the hall." And she hesitated, her gaze darting briefly toward the window, where only a wall of blackness stood behind the glass. "Do not look into the woods after midnight." Emily blinked, unsure if she had misheard. "Sorry, what?" "Don't look into the woods after midnight," the woman repeated quietly, her voice lower. "No matter what you hear." Emily opened her mouth to ask more, but the receptionist had already turned away, her shoulders trembling slightly. The conversation was over. Room 5 was small but tidy, with an old iron bed frame and a single lamp on a nightstand. Emily tossed her bag on the bed, sat down, and exhaled deeply. The room felt colder than the lobby, colder than outside, like every wall had soaked up winter and refused to let it go. She plugged in her phone, checked her messages, and leaned back to relax. But the silence in the room felt wrong. Not peaceful empty. Too empty. It wasn't long before she decided to take a walk around the town. Willow Ridge had a population of maybe a few dozen, judging by the number of houses she saw. Most were dark, with curtains drawn tightly. A few porch lights were on, but even those seemed dimmer than usual. As if struggling to cut through the heavy air, she snapped photos of abandoned storefronts, weathered signs, old mailboxes twisted with rust. The town had history, that much was clear, but it also carried something else, something heavy. Something watching. By the time she returned to the inn, the sky had sunk into a deep, oppressive black. Emily locked her door, showered, and climbed into bed, determined to rest before exploring more in the morning. She set her phone on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle in. Minutes passed, then an hour. Emily wasn't sure when she drifted toward sleep. But suddenly something pulled her back awake, something soft, distant, floating through the air. A voice. At first it was faint, barely more than a whisper, brushing the edges of her consciousness. She sat up slowly, listening. The room was still, but she could feel something shift around her, as if the shadows themselves had moved. Then she heard it again. Illy, her blood chilled. The voice came from outside her window, soft, trembling, as though someone stood just beyond the glass. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at her phone. 12:43 a.m. Midnight. The receptionist's warning surfaced in her mind. Don't look into the woods after midnight. Emily forced herself to stay still, her heart pounding so violently she felt the mattress tremble beneath her. Her instinct screamed at her to ignore the voice, to pretend she hadn't heard anything. But the voice came again. Emily, please. It sounded human, not like an animal, not like the wind. It was a real voice, fragile and scared. Her chest tightened. She slowly turned her head toward the window, but didn't get up. The curtains were drawn thick, old fabric that blocked any outside light. She couldn't see what was beyond them, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Her mouth felt dry. She swallowed hard. Then the voice changed subtly, wrongfully. It sharpened, smoothed, matched her own tone. Her own voice spoke from outside the window. Emily, help me. A cold shock traveled down her spine. Hearing your own voice where it should not be, where it could not be, did something to the human mind. It hit some ancient, primal part of her brain that understood instinctively that this was no person, no echo, no trick. Something was calling her, something that knew her name, something that could mimic her perfectly. She pressed both hands over her mouth to keep herself from gasping. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it had started. Silence felt again heavy, suffocating, unnatural. Emily didn't move for the rest of the night. She sat upright in the bed, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the window but never daring to approach it. She didn't sleep. She didn't blink for long stretches. Every nerve in her body felt stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. When pale morning light finally seeped through the curtains, she felt tears burn her eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer relief. She grabbed her things and went to the lobby, desperate for answers. The receptionist looked at her with a knowing expression. You heard them, she said softly. Emily's hands trembled. What was that? The woman lowered her eyes. They mimic what they want to take. A cold dread washed over Emily, heavier than anything she had ever felt. She decided she needed to leave town immediately. But when she reached her car and turned the key, the engine didn't even try to start. She was trapped in Willow Ridge, and the sun would go down again. Emily spent most of the morning pacing the cracked pavement outside the Marrow Inn, her arms wrapped tightly around herself to fight off the cold that never seemed to leave the air in Willow Ridge. She kept looking toward the forest, expecting now, fearing movement between the trees. But everything was still, too still. Even the birds refused to sing here. The silence pressed down on her like a weight. The mechanic arrived around noon, a man in a grease-stained jacket who looked older than he probably was. Deep wrinkles cut through his sunken cheeks, and his eyes darted nervously toward the tree line as he examined the hood of her car. Well, he muttered after a long pause, your battery's dead. Wires are corroded. Something's chewed through a few connections. He trailed off as if hesitant to say more. I'll need to take this back to my shop. Earliest I can have it fixed is by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Another night. Emily felt her stomach twist. Is there any way at all you could finish it today? He shook his head. Not here. Not with the tools I've got on me. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. Stay inside tonight. Hear me? Lock your door. Don't talk to anything you hear outside. And don't let it imitate someone you miss. Emily froze, her breath catching. "What do you mean? Imitate?" But the mechanic had already turned away, hitching her car to his tow truck. He didn't look back as he drove off, dust curling behind the tires like smoke. Back in the inn, a suffocating stillness settled over the hallways. At times, Emily thought she heard faint scratching inside the walls, but whenever she pressed her ear to the wooden paneling, the sound stopped instantly. She tried to distract herself by reviewing photos on her camera. Most were harmless rusted signs, empty streets, old buildings sagging with age. But one picture made her pulse spike. It was a shot from the previous night, when she'd taken a photo of the woods at dusk. In the far left corner, so faint she had missed it earlier, was a human-shaped silhouette, crouched between two trees. No features, no face, just a dark figure watching. A tightness formed in her throat. By late afternoon, the sun had already begun sinking behind the dense canopy of trees, turning everything a dull, lifeless gray. Emily tried to eat dinner at the small diner across the road, but the few locals inside fell silent the moment she walked in. Their eyes followed her, fearful, pitying. She felt like prey. As she finished eating, an older man approached her table. His face was weathered, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on the chair across from her. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "People like you, outsiders, you're the ones they follow." Emily swallowed hard. Who's following me?" He didn't answer. He only whispered, "Don't listen to their voices. They're not people. They're not anything God made." Then he walked away, leaving her more terrified than before. The moment Emily stepped outside, a gust of cold wind rushed past her, whispering through the trees. The sky was nearly black. She hurried back to the inn, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. Something about the air felt different, charged. A quiet dread seeped into her bones. By the time she locked herself inside room 5, night had fallen completely. The darkness outside wasn't normal darkness, it was thick, suffocating, unmoving. It pressed against the window like something alive. Emily closed the curtains tightly and pushed the dresser in front of the door. Her heart beat too fast, her breath shallow. Hours crept by. Then, somewhere around 1 a.m., came the first sound, a soft shuffle. Then another, bare feet dragging across old wooden boards. Inching down the hallway, growing closer. Emily pressed a shaking hand over her mouth as the footsteps stopped directly outside her room. Silence. Then -3 slow knocks. Knocks. Knock. Her pulse hammered. Another knock came, harder this time, making the dresser rattle. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, but her ears remained terribly, painfully alert. Then she heard her own voice speak from the other side of the door. "Emily, please let me in. I'm hurt." Her stomach turned to ice. It wasn't just mimicking the tone, it had her pitch, her breathing patterns, her exact trembling hesitation. It sounded like she was listening to a recording of herself. "Emily, open the door. It's cold out here." Emily backed away until she hit the wall. She shook her head violently, tears filling her eyes. "No," she whispered to herself. "It's not real." The voice changed, suddenly softened, warmed. "Sweetheart, it's me." Emily's breath caught. It was her mother's voice, perfectly replicated, gentle, familiar, heartbreaking. Her mother had been dead for 5 years. "Open the door, baby." The voice crooned, "Please. Mommy needs you." Emily clamped her hands over her ears, but the voices grew louder, overlapping, morphing from one familiar tone to another. Her mother, her own voice, a stranger's voice, a child's voice, all weaving together like a sick chorus. "Let us in." The words scraped through the wood like claws. The doorknob rattled violently, spinning back and forth, shaking the entire doorframe. Emily grabbed her camera with trembling hands and crept closer, holding it near the floor. Her fingers shook as she angled the lens toward the small crack beneath the door. She hesitated only a second before pressing the shutter. A blinding flash lit the hallway outside and something moved. Jerking back from the light, Emily gasped, stumbling away from the door. She didn't dare look again. She didn't dare breathe. The thing outside responded with a guttural hiss, scraping its limbs against the door, testing the wood, pressing against it with slow, deliberate force. Then, as if losing interest, the footsteps retreated soft at first, then vanishing entirely. Emily stayed frozen in place until dawn, when some...
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.